Bobby Patterson clutched the wooden lunchbox, his wife's final gift, as rejection number 12 this month crushed what little hope remained. The parking lot of Whitmore Industries stretched endlessly before his rusted pickup truck. Suddenly, his passenger door exploded open. A woman in a $1,000 suit tumbled inside, designer heels clicking against his worn floor mats. Her perfectly styled blonde hair was disheveled. Mascara streaked down porcelain cheeks. Manicured fingers trembled as she gripped a faded photograph. "Shut up and drive!" she commanded, her voice shattering like glass. "Don't ask questions, just please." Bobby's breath caught in his throat. Those eyes, emerald green, wild with panic, stirred something deep in his memory. Something impossible. Something that died 20 years ago in a house fire that took everything from him. The woman beside him looked exactly like his little sister Lexi. But Lexi was dead. Bobby's fingers loosened on the steering wheel as the woman beside him dissolved into quiet sobs. Her shoulders shook beneath the expensive fabric of her suit jacket. The photograph in her hands appeared wrinkled and worn, like something carried for years. Without thinking, Bobby reached into his glove compartment and pulled out a crumpled napkin from Murphy's Diner. He offered it silently. The woman looked up, her green eyes swimming with tears that made his chest tighten with an ache he hadn't felt in decades. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice now soft and broken. The commanding tone from moments before had vanished completely. "Where do you need to go?" Bobby asked gently, starting the engine. The truck coughed to life with its familiar rumble. The woman stared out the passenger window at the gleaming corporate towers that seemed to mock them both from their heights. "Anywhere," she said. "Anywhere but here." As they pulled out of the parking lot, Bobby caught her reflection in the side mirror. The way she tucked her hair behind her left ear was exactly like Lexi used to do when she was nervous. The same delicate gesture he'd watched 1,000 times during their childhood in the cramped apartment above Henderson's woodshop. But that was impossible. Lexi had been 19 when the fire took her. This woman was clearly in her 30s, successful, sophisticated. Everything Lexi never had the chance to become. 3 years had passed since Martha's funeral, and Bobby still found himself setting 2 plates for dinner before remembering. Their small apartment in Millbrook felt hollow, without her laughter echoing through the rooms. 7-year-old Timmy had stopped asking when Mommy was coming home, but Bobby caught him talking to Martha's picture when he thought no one was listening. The wooden lunchbox sat on the kitchen counter like a shrine. Martha had carved it during her final weeks in the hospital, her fingers growing weaker with each passing day. "Promise me you'll keep creating beautiful things, Bobby," she'd whispered, pressing the box into his hands. "Don't let the world make you forget who you are." But the world had other plans. Henderson's woodshop closed 6 months after Martha died, taking Bobby's livelihood with it. The new owners wanted modern efficiency, not craftsmanship. Bobby watched 20 years of his work disappear behind a demolition crew's machinery. Now he juggled 3 part-time jobs, washing dishes at Murphy's Diner, stocking shelves at the grocery store, and doing odd carpentry work for neighbors who paid in cash and sympathy. The medical bills from Martha's treatment still arrived monthly, each envelope a reminder of promises he'd made and debts he couldn't escape. Mrs. Rodriguez from next door kept Timmy after school when Bobby worked late. She never asked for payment, just squeezed Bobby's shoulder and whispered prayers in Spanish when she thought he looked particularly worn down. "That boy needs his father to smile again," she'd say, her weathered hands gentle on Timmy's dark hair. Bobby tried, but some days the effort felt like lifting concrete blocks. Some days he caught himself staring at Martha's lunchbox and wondering if he was strong enough to keep the promises he'd made to a dying woman who'd believed in him more than he'd ever believed in himself. The stranger in his truck directed him through Millbrook's quiet streets with whispered instructions. "Left here. Right at the stop sign. Park there." She pointed to a small diner Bobby recognized but had never entered. Rosie's all-night cafe. The kind of place where people went to disappear for a while. The neon sign flickered pink and blue against the evening sky. She turned to him then, and Bobby saw something vulnerable beneath her polished exterior. "I know this sounds crazy," she said, "but would you mind staying, just for a cup of coffee? I can't be alone right now." Her voice carried the same tremor Bobby heard in his own during the darkest nights after Martha's death. They sat across from each other in a corner booth, steam rising from chipped ceramic mugs. The woman had introduced herself simply as Alex, no last name offered. She'd removed her suit jacket, revealing a simple white blouse that made her look younger, more fragile. The photograph lay face down on the table between them, like a secret neither was ready to share. "You have kind eyes," Alex said suddenly, her fingers wrapped around her coffee mug for warmth. "I forgot people could have kind eyes." Bobby studied her face in the diner's fluorescent lighting. The resemblance to Lexi was unsettling, but this woman carried a weight his sister never had, the burden of success achieved at some unnamed cost. "Rough day?" Bobby asked, though the question felt inadequate given her earlier breakdown. Alex laughed, but the sound held no humor. "Rough life," she corrected. "I just walked out of the most important board meeting of my career, told some very powerful people exactly what I thought of their proposal to close down 3 more manufacturing plants." She looked up at Bobby then, her green eyes searching his face. Hundreds of families about to lose everything, and they were discussing it like a line item on a budget. I couldn't sit there and pretend it was just business anymore. Her voice cracked on the last word, and Bobby felt something shift in his chest, a recognition of shared pain that went deeper than sympathy. The coffee grew cold between them as Alex spoke about corporate boardrooms that felt like tombs and decisions that affected lives she'd never see. Bobby found himself talking about Martha, about Timmy's latest drawing of their family that included an empty space where Mommy used to stand, about the dreams he'd once had of expanding Henderson's woodshop into something beautiful and lasting. "Martha believed I could build furniture that would last generations," he said, his thumb tracing the rim of his mug. "She said my hands could create magic if I just trusted them." Alex leaned forward then, her eyes bright with interest. "What kind of magic?" she asked, and Bobby realized it had been months since anyone had asked him about his craft with genuine curiosity. Their conversation stretched past midnight, weaving between shared losses and forgotten dreams. Alex knew surprising things about woodworking, the difference between cherry and maple, the patience required for proper joinery. When Bobby mentioned the lunchbox in his truck, her breath caught for just a moment. "Could I see it?" she asked softly. They walked back to his pickup together, their footsteps echoing in the empty parking lot. Bobby retrieved the box carefully, his hands reverent as always when touching Martha's final gift. Alex's fingers trembled when he placed it in her palms. "She carved this herself," Alex whispered, running her fingertips along the delicate engravings. "During her final weeks, she said it would keep a part of her with me." Alex's eyes filled with tears as she traced the inscription. "Keep creating, my love." When she handed it back, their fingers brushed, and Bobby felt a jolt of connection he hadn't experienced since Martha's death. 3 weeks passed before Bobby saw Alex again. She appeared at Murphy's Diner during his Friday night shift, sitting alone in the corner booth where they'd first talked. Gone was the expensive suit, replaced by jeans and a simple sweater that made her look like someone he might have known in another life. "I brought you something," she said when he approached with a coffee pot. From her purse, she pulled a small wooden chisel, antique and perfectly balanced. It belonged to someone I knew who loved woodworking. I thought you might appreciate it." Bobby accepted the tool with wonder, feeling its weight in his palm. The handle was worn smooth by decades of use, marked with the patina of countless hours spent creating. "This is beautiful," he breathed. "Are you sure?" Alex nodded, but Bobby caught something complicated in her expression, a mixture of grief and hope that mirrored his own complicated relationship with Martha's memory. Their friendship developed slowly, built on late-night conversations and shared silences that felt comfortable rather than awkward. Alex began appearing at unexpected moments. When Bobby's car broke down outside the grocery store, she happened to be driving by with jumper cables. When Timmy fell at the playground and scraped his knee, Alex materialized with a first aid kit and gentle hands that calmed the boy's tears. She never explained these coincidences, and Bobby stopped questioning them. Her presence felt like grace, unexpected and undeserved, but desperately needed. Timmy took to her immediately, chattering about school and soccer and the drawings he made for Daddy's lunchbox. Alex listened with an attention that went beyond politeness, asking questions that showed she truly cared about a 7-year-old's world. Bobby found himself looking forward to their encounters with an intensity that made him feel guilty. Sometimes he caught himself choosing his clothes more carefully, hoping he might run into Alex at the grocery store or the library. The guilt gnawed at him during quiet moments. Was he betraying Martha's memory by enjoying another woman's company? But when Alex laughed at Timmy's jokes or helped Bobby carry groceries to his truck without being asked, the loneliness that had been his constant companion for 3 years lifted just enough to let him breathe. She never spoke about her work beyond that first night, and Bobby never pressed for details. Everyone in Millbrook deserved their secrets, especially someone who brought light into his darkness without asking for anything in return. One evening, as Bobby tucked Timmy into bed, his son asked the question that had been weighing on both their minds. "Daddy, is Miss Alex going to be my new mommy?" The innocent inquiry hit Bobby like a physical blow. He sat on the edge of Timmy's bed, searching for words that wouldn't lie, but wouldn't crush hope either. "Miss Alex is our friend," Bobby said carefully. "Good friends are precious, and we're lucky to have her." Timmy considered this with 7-year-old seriousness. "I think Mommy would like Miss Alex," he said finally. "They both have nice hands." Bobby's throat tightened at the observation. Martha had indeed had beautiful hands, calloused from her work at the flower shop, but gentle and strong. The same qualities he'd noticed in the way Alex handled his son's scraped knees and borrowed books from the library. The crisis came on a Tuesday morning when Timmy's school called about an emergency. Bobby was 3 towns over, installing cabinets for a customer who'd finally agreed to pay cash for his work. His phone battery was nearly dead, and panic clawed at his throat as he tried to reach Mrs. Rodriguez. No answer. The school wouldn't release details over the phone, only that Timmy needed someone immediately. Bobby's hands shook as he called the one number he'd memorized in recent weeks, though he'd never used it for anything this important. "Alex," he said when she answered, his voice breaking. "I need help. It's Timmy and I'm already on my way." She interrupted. "Which hospital?" The certainty in her voice cut through his panic like a blade. She'd known before he'd finished explaining, moving with efficiency that spoke of resources Bobby couldn't imagine. "How did you—" "Later," she said. "Just drive safely. I've got him." Bobby arrived at Millbrook General Hospital to find Alex in the waiting room, still in what looked like expensive work clothes, but now holding Timmy's small hand while he slept fitfully on the uncomfortable chair beside her. The sight of them together, this woman who'd become precious to him, cradling his most precious thing, made Bobby's chest constrict with emotions he couldn't name. Appendicitis, Alex said softly when she saw him. They caught it early. He's going to be fine. But Bobby barely heard the medical details. He was watching the way Alex's thumb traced gentle circles on the back of Timmy's hand, the same unconscious gesture Martha used to make. The surgeon said 20 minutes to prep. Alex continued. I signed the necessary forms as his emergency contact. I hope that was... Thank you, Bobby whispered, his voice rough with unshed tears. I don't know how to thank you. As they waited for Timmy to wake up from surgery, Bobby found himself really looking at Alex for the first time in weeks. She wore a tailored blazer that probably cost more than his monthly rent, paired with heels that clicked authoritatively against the hospital's linoleum floors. Her hair was styled in a way that spoke of expensive salons, and the watch on her wrist caught the fluorescent light with unmistakable luxury. Alex, he said slowly. Who are you, really? She'd been texting on a phone that looked more advanced than anything Bobby had ever seen, but now she set it aside and met his eyes. I'm someone who cares about you and Timmy, she said simply. Isn't that enough? Bobby wanted to say yes, but doubt had begun creeping in around the edges of his trust. The efficiency with which she'd handled the hospital, the way staff seemed to defer to her without question, the casual mention of signing forms that should have required extensive authorization. Pieces of a puzzle he'd been ignoring began forming a picture he didn't like. Timmy's recovery went smoothly, but Bobby's unease grew with each passing day. Alex visited frequently, bringing gifts that seemed too expensive for casual friendship, a gaming system that appeared one day, premium health insurance enrollment papers that mysteriously arrived in Bobby's mailbox, repairs to his truck that he hadn't authorized, but somehow had been completed while he was at work. When he tried to discuss these incidents with Alex, she deflected with questions about Timmy's health or observations about the weather. The generosity felt increasingly like control, and Bobby began to wonder if he'd been naive to trust someone whose last name he still didn't know. The woman who'd seemed like an answer to prayer was beginning to feel like a beautiful lie, and the thought terrified him, more than any rejection letter or medical bill ever had. The truth exploded into Bobby's life on a Thursday afternoon when Timmy didn't come home from school. Bobby waited 30 minutes past the usual time before calling the school, his anxiety building with each unanswered ring. Mr. Patterson. The secretary's voice was tight with concern. Timmy was picked up an hour ago by the woman on his emergency contact list. She had proper identification and authorization. Bobby's blood turned to ice. What woman? Ms. Alexandra Whitmore. The secretary read from her records. She's listed as his legal guardian in case of emergency. Didn't you... Bobby hung up without finishing the conversation, his hands shaking as he dialed Alex's number. It went straight to voicemail. He tried again. Nothing. The woman he'd trusted with his son had disappeared, taking with her every assumption Bobby had made about their relationship. Bobby drove through Millbrook like a man possessed, checking every place he'd ever seen Alex, every restaurant where they'd shared coffee, every park where she'd pushed Timmy on the swings. Nothing. His truck's engine wheezed in protest as he pushed it beyond its limits, his mind cycling through scenarios that grew darker with each passing minute. Finally, desperately, he drove to the one place he'd never thought to look, Whitmore Industries. The building that had started this entire nightmare stood gleaming against the evening sky, its glass facades reflecting Bobby's fear back at him. In the executive parking garage, he spotted a familiar figure beside a car that probably cost more than Bobby would earn in 5 years. Alex stood with her back to him, speaking into a phone with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. She wore a business suit that transformed her into someone Bobby didn't recognize, her posture radiating power and confidence he'd never seen before. Where is my son?" Bobby's voice echoed through the parking garage as he slammed his truck door. Alex turned slowly, and Bobby saw the truth written across her face before she spoke a single word. The woman he'd known, vulnerable, kind, mysteriously helpful Alex, had been a performance. This version stood straighter, spoke with crisp authority, carried herself like someone who'd never doubted her place in the world. "He's safe," she said, her voice steady but her eyes filled with something that might have been regret. "He's upstairs in the executive lounge, probably finishing the pizza I ordered for him." Bobby stared at her, trying to reconcile the woman he'd fallen for with this polished stranger. "Who are you?" he whispered. Alex's throat worked as she swallowed hard. "I'm Alexandra Whitmore," she said finally, "CEO of Whitmore Industries, and 20 years ago I was Lexi Patterson, your little sister." The parking garage seemed to tilt around Bobby as the words hit him. He'd buried Lexi 20 years ago, or thought he had. The apartment fire that destroyed everything he'd owned had taken his 19-year-old sister along with every photograph, every memento, every proof that she'd existed. The authorities had found remains, dental records, enough evidence to close the case and grant death certificates. Bobby had mourned her for 2 decades, carrying the guilt of their last argument about her college plans, about the boyfriend he'd disapproved of, about the dreams she'd had that seemed too big for their small world. "That's impossible," he said, but even as the words left his mouth, he could see Lexi in Alexandra's features, the same stubborn chin, the same way of standing with one hip cocked when she was nervous, the same unconscious habit of tucking hair behind her left ear. "The fire wasn't an accident," Alexandra said, her voice steady but her hands trembling. "David Whitmore's son caused it during a drug deal gone wrong. The family covered it up, but I was pulled from the wreckage with severe burns and smoke inhalation. I was unconscious for 3 weeks." She paused, gathering strength for the rest of the story. "When I woke up, David Whitmore was there. He told me you died in the fire, that I was the only survivor. He offered me a choice. Let him tell the world that Lexi Patterson died, and become his daughter with every advantage money could buy, or face criminal charges as an accessory to drug trafficking." Bobby's legs felt weak as the implications crashed over him. "You believed him?" "I was 19, alone, and terrified," Alexandra said. "He had death certificates, newspaper clippings, even a funeral program with your name on it. I mourned you for 15 years, Bobby. I mourned you, and built a life on the foundation of that grief." The revelation that his sister had been alive all these years while he'd grieved her loss felt like drowning in memories. Bobby leaned against his truck for support, his mind rewriting 20 years of history. Every birthday he'd spent thinking about what Lexi might have looked like as she aged. Every achievement he'd wished he could share with her. Every moment of loneliness that might have been different if he'd known she was alive. "How long have you known?" he asked. "That I was alive?" Alexandra's composure cracked slightly. 3 years. Right after Martha died, I hired investigators to research my past life. I needed to know who I really was, beyond what the Whitmores had made me." She paused, her voice growing softer. "I've been watching you, Bobby, making sure you and Timmy were okay. The emergency contact authorization, the insurance enrollment, the truck repairs, I was trying to help without interfering." "Interfering?" Bobby's voice rose with a mixture of anger and heartbreak. "You let me believe you were dead for 20 years, and you call helping interference?" Alexandra flinched as if he'd struck her. "I was trying to protect you from this." She gestured to the gleaming corporate tower above them. "From what I've become, from the choices I've made." Bobby saw tears gathering in her eyes, but his own pain was too raw for sympathy. "What choices?" he demanded. Being rich? Being successful? Or was it choosing to abandon your family? The words hung between them like a blade, cutting through 20 years of love and 20 minutes of anger with equal precision. Alexandra's face went pale, and Bobby realized he'd crossed a line he might never be able to uncross. I never chose to abandon you, Alexandra said quietly. Every day for 20 years, I've lived with the guilt of surviving when I thought you hadn't. Every business decision I've made, every dollar I've earned, every life I've tried to improve through charity work, it's all been penance for being alive when my brother wasn't. She wiped tears from her cheeks with the back of her hand, a gesture so reminiscent of the little girl Bobby remembered that his anger wavered. When I found out you were alive, I was already CEO of a company I'd inherited from people who'd stolen my identity. I couldn't just walk away from responsibilities that affect thousands of jobs, including yours. Bobby's confusion must have shown on his face, because Alexandra continued. Henderson's woodshop was closed by Whitmore Industries subsidiaries. I've spent the last 3 years trying to undo that damage without revealing why it mattered to me. The truth hit Bobby like a physical blow. You've been manipulating my entire life. Alexandra shook her head desperately. I've been trying to fix it. The job rejections, the financial struggles, the medical bills from Martha's treatment. I've been working behind the scenes to create opportunities, to clear obstacles. Bobby felt sick as the implications sank in. So nothing I've accomplished has been real? Every job I've applied for, every effort I've made to rebuild my life, it's all been your corporate charity? The word charity came out like a curse, and Bobby saw Alexandra wince. That's not how I see it, she said. I see it as family taking care of family. Family. Bobby laughed bitterly. Family doesn't lie for 3 years. Family doesn't play games with someone's life. He turned toward his truck, unable to look at her anymore. Family doesn't let you grieve them when they're sitting in boardrooms deciding your fate. Bobby, please. Alexandra reached for his arm, but Bobby pulled away. Where's my son? He demanded. I'm taking him home. Alexandra's face crumpled, but she maintained her composure. 32nd floor, executive lounge. The receptionist will direct you. She paused, her voice breaking slightly. He's been asking about you. I told him you were coming. Bobby nodded curtly and headed for the building entrance, his heart hammering against his ribs. Behind him, he heard Alexandra call his name one more time, but he didn't turn around. He couldn't. The woman who'd brought light back into his life had been built on a foundation of lies, and Bobby didn't know how to reconcile the tenderness he'd felt for Alex with the betrayal he felt toward Alexandra. All he knew was that he needed to hold his son and figure out how to explain that sometimes the people who save you are the same ones who break you. The elevator ride to the 30th floor felt like ascending into another world, one of marble floors and oil paintings and furniture that cost more than Bobby's annual income. Timmy was exactly where Alexandra had said he'd be, curled up in a leather chair that dwarfed his small frame, watching cartoons on a television screen larger than Bobby's living room wall. Daddy! Timmy launched himself into Bobby's arms with 7-year-old enthusiasm. Miss Alex said you were coming. She ordered pizza with extra cheese, and there's a whole room just for games. And the lady at the desk gave me juice in a real glass cup. Bobby held his son tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of childhood, apple shampoo and the lingering sweetness of pizza sauce. Are you ready to go home, buddy? Bobby asked. Timmy pulled back to study his father's face with the intuitive wisdom children sometimes possessed. Are you mad at Miss Alex? He asked quietly. It's complicated, Bobby said, which was the most honest answer he could manage. They drove home in relative silence, Timmy chattering occasionally about the marvels he'd seen in the corporate tower, while Bobby's mind churned through 20 years of revised history. Every memory of Lexi now had to be reconciled with the woman she'd become. The little girl who'd dreamed of college and adventure had achieved both, but at a cost neither of them could have imagined. Bobby found himself mourning two different losses, the sister he'd thought dead, and the woman he'd fallen in love with who'd never really existed. By the time they reached their apartment, Bobby felt hollowed out, carved empty by revelations that changed everything he'd believed about his past and his present. He tucked Timmy into bed with extra care, knowing that some kinds of safety were more fragile than others. That night, Bobby sat at his kitchen table with Martha's lunchbox in front of him, trying to make sense of feelings too complex for simple anger or simple forgiveness. Alexandra's business card lay beside the box, thick, expensive paper with embossed lettering that spoke of a world Bobby had never imagined entering. She'd slipped it into his jacket pocket sometime during their confrontation, though he had no memory of her doing so. On the back, she'd written a phone number in handwriting he recognized from 20-year-old birthday cards and grocery lists. "Call me when you're ready to hear the whole truth." The note said, "I owe you that much. Lexi." The familiar nickname, written in familiar script, made Bobby's chest tighten with an ache that had nothing to do with betrayal and everything to do with love that had survived despite impossible circumstances. Days passed without contact. Bobby returned to his routine of odd jobs and evening shifts, but the normalcy felt performative now. Mrs. Rodriguez asked about that nice lady who'd been helping with Timmy, and Bobby struggled to explain an absence he couldn't define. Timmy asked when Miss Alex would visit again, and Bobby's heart broke a little more each time he deflected the question. At work, Bobby found himself wondering about every corporate decision that had affected his life. Had Alexandra's influence shaped more than he knew? The paranoia was exhausting, but so was the loneliness that had returned like a familiar weight on his shoulders. He'd grown accustomed to having someone to share the small victories and daily struggles of single parenthood. Without Alex, without Alexandra, the silence in his apartment felt louder than it had in months. Bobby's breaking point came during a late shift at Murphy's Diner when a customer left behind a copy of the Millbrook Gazette with Alexandra's photograph on the front page. The headline read, "Whitmore Industries CEO announces major restructuring, hundreds of local jobs saved." Bobby read the article twice, his coffee growing cold as he absorbed the details. Alexandra had convinced the board to reverse their decision about plant closures, using personal funds to subsidize operations that weren't immediately profitable but served community needs. The article mentioned her commitment to ethical business practices that prioritize human welfare over short-term profits. Bobby stared at the photograph. Alexandra in full corporate mode, standing before a podium with the kind of confidence that came from wielding real power. But her eyes held something Bobby recognized now, the weight of decisions that affected lives beyond her own. The article changed something fundamental in Bobby's understanding of what had transpired between them. Alexandra hadn't just been playing games with his life. She'd been wrestling with the kind of moral complexity that came with inherited power and inherited guilt. Bobby began to see their relationship not as manipulation, but as two people trying to heal 20-year-old wounds while navigating present-day responsibilities neither had asked for. That didn't excuse the deception, but it made it more human, more forgivable, more like something his sister might have done if faced with impossible choices and unlimited resources. Bobby folded the newspaper carefully and slipped it into his jacket pocket, next to Alexandra's business card that he still carried but hadn't used. The crisis that brought them back together came without warning on a Saturday morning when Bobby was teaching Timmy to sand a piece of wood in their apartment's small balcony space. His phone rang with a number he didn't recognize, but the voice was familiar, Alexandra's assistant, panic threading through her professional tone. "Mr. Patterson, Ms. Whitmore asked me to call if anything happened to her. She's been in an accident." Bobby's hands went numb around the phone. What kind of accident? Car crash on Highway 27. She's at Millbrook General, conscious, but... The assistant's voice broke slightly. She keeps asking for Lexi's brother. I think she means you. Bobby was already reaching for his jacket, his mind racing through logistical details. Timmy, we need to go. He called to his son. Miss Alex needs us. The words came out before Bobby could analyze them, but they felt right in a way that surprised him. They found Alexandra in a private room that spoke of expensive insurance and corporate benefits, her left arm in a cast and a bandage covering stitches along her hairline. She looked smaller in the hospital bed, more like the vulnerable woman Bobby had fallen for than the CEO who'd revealed herself in the parking garage. You came, she said when she saw them, her voice hoarse with medication and relief. Timmy ran to her bedside immediately, careful not to jostle her injuries. Miss Alex, Daddy said you needed us, so we came really fast. Alexandra's eyes filled with tears as she looked at Bobby over Timmy's head. I told my assistant to call you if anything happened because... She paused, searching for words. Because you're the only real family I have left. The simple honesty of the statement cut through weeks of anger and confusion, leaving Bobby with the stark realization that whatever else had passed between them, the love was real. The doctors say you're going to be fine, Bobby said, approaching the bed carefully. Alexandra nodded, but her eyes never left his face. Bobby, I need to tell you something about the accident. Her voice carried a weight that made Bobby's stomach clench. It wasn't random. Someone targeted my car because of the restructuring announcement, because I chose people over profits. Bobby felt cold wash over him. Targeted how? The brake lines were cut, Alexandra said quietly, mindful of Timmy's presence. Corporate security found evidence in the parking garage. Someone wanted to send a message about my business decisions. Bobby stared at her, understanding dawning. You're in danger because you saved those jobs. Alexandra's smile held no humor. Turns out ethics are expensive in more ways than one. Bobby found himself reaching for her uninjured hand before he could stop himself. What happens now? Now I have to decide if I'm brave enough to keep fighting, Alexandra said, her fingers intertwining with Bobby's. Or if I should step down and disappear before someone gets hurt. Bobby looked at their joined hands, his calloused from years of manual labor, hers soft despite the IV needle taped to her wrist. Someone already got hurt, he said quietly. You got hurt. Alexandra's breath caught at the tenderness in his voice. I meant someone who matters, she whispered. You matter, Bobby said, the words surprising him with their certainty. You've always mattered. Even when I was angry, even when I felt betrayed, you matter. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of 20 years and 3 weeks and one car accident settling between them like a bridge neither had expected to cross again. Timmy, who'd been unusually quiet during the adult conversation, suddenly looked up at Alexandra with 7-year-old directness. Miss Alex, are you really Daddy's sister? Alexandra glanced at Bobby, who nodded slightly. Yes, sweetheart, I am. Timmy processed this information with the adaptability of childhood. So that makes you my aunt. If you want it to, Alexandra said carefully. Timmy brightened immediately. I always wanted an aunt. Can you teach me how to be rich? Bobby and Alexandra laughed despite themselves, and the sound felt like something healing in the sterile hospital room. I can teach you about responsibility, Alexandra said. Being rich is less fun than people think. Timmy considered this seriously. Can you teach Daddy too? He worries about money a lot. Out of the mouths of babes, Bobby thought, feeling exposed by his son's innocent observation. Over the following days, as Alexandra recovered and Bobby processed the newest revelations about corporate threats and family obligations, they began having the conversations they should have had 3 weeks earlier. Alexandra explained the full scope of her identity crisis, how becoming Alexandra Whitmore had required burying Lexi Patterson so completely that she'd sometimes forgotten which person was real. "I missed you every day for 20 years. She told Bobby during one of their late-night talks in the hospital room. "But I also became someone you might not recognize, someone I'm not sure I like." Bobby found himself sharing his own struggles with identity, how becoming a single father had required him to bury the young man who'd dreamed of expanding Henderson's woodshop into an artistic legacy. Martha believed in that person. He said, "Sometimes I think she married potential more than reality." The threats against Alexandra escalated, forcing her to accept corporate security that transformed her life into something resembling protective custody. Bobby found himself drawn into a world of background checks and security briefings, his apartment examined for vulnerabilities he'd never considered. "This is insane," he told Alexandra during one of their supervised visits. "People shouldn't have to live like this." Alexandra's smile was tired. "Welcome to the cost of power. Every decision I make affects thousands of people, and some of those people have very strong opinions about my choices." Bobby looked at the security guards positioned discreetly around the hospital room. "Is it worth it?" he asked. "The power, the responsibility, all of it?" Alexandra was quiet for a long moment. "It is if I can use it to protect the people I love," she said finally. "It is if I can honor Lexi's memory by being better than the system that created Alexandra." The resolution came not through grand gestures, but through quiet choices made in hospital rooms and apartment kitchens. Alexandra decided to maintain her position as CEO, but restructure her personal life to include the family she'd rediscovered. Bobby chose to trust the woman his sister had become, while mourning the relationship they'd lost. They began building something new, not the simple friendship Bobby had cherished as Alex, and not the uncomplicated sibling bond they'd shared as children, but something more complex and honest. "I don't know how to be your sister and your friend and your responsibility all at once," Alexandra admitted during one of their conversations. "Maybe we don't have to figure it all out immediately," Bobby replied. "Maybe we just take it one day at a time." 6 months later, Bobby stood in the workshop space Alexandra had helped him lease in downtown Millbrook, teaching Timmy the difference between cherry wood and maple, while Alexandra reviewed business reports at a table Bobby had built specifically for her visits. The workshop wasn't charity. Bobby was paying market rent with money earned from commissioned pieces and corporate consulting on sustainable manufacturing processes. Alexandra had helped create the opportunities, but Bobby's skill and dedication were building the reputation. Henderson Patterson Woodworks read the sign outside, honoring both his professional legacy and his family name. The hyphenation had been Timmy's idea, suggested during one of their family dinners that had become a weekly tradition. Alexandra had kept her corporate apartment in the city, but purchased a small house 2 blocks from Bobby's apartment building. She never presumed to insert herself into their daily routine, but her presence had become a comfortable constant, someone to call when Timmy had a school event and Bobby was working, someone to share the small victories and ordinary frustrations of rebuilding a life. They'd never formally defined their relationship, never declared themselves anything more than family learning to be friends again. But Mrs. Rodriguez had started setting 4 places for dinner when she invited them over, and Timmy's drawings now included a tall, blonde woman standing next to Daddy and himself, usually holding hands in a row of stick figures that looked remarkably like contentment. The wooden lunch box still held its place of honor on Bobby's kitchen counter, but now it was accompanied by a new creation, a jewelry box Alexandra had commissioned Bobby to make for Martha's engagement ring and wedding band. "She should be part of this," Alexandra had said when she'd suggested the project. She brought us back together, in a way. Bobby had carved the box from the same cherry wood Martha had used for the lunchbox, creating a pair that spoke to continuity rather than replacement. Inside the jewelry box, along with Martha's rings, Bobby kept the original business card Alexandra had given him, worn soft from handling but never discarded. Some promises he'd learned were worth keeping even when the circumstances that created them changed beyond recognition. On quiet Sunday mornings, when Timmy slept late and Alexandra brought coffee and newspapers to Bobby's kitchen table, they sometimes talked about the road not taken, what their lives might have looked like if the fire had never happened, if 20 years of separation hadn't carved them into different people with different needs. But those conversations always ended the same way, with one of them observing that the people they'd become might never have found each other without the journey they'd taken apart. I'm not sure 19-year-old Lexi would have known how to love Timmy the way Alexandra does, she'd said recently. And I'm not sure 25-year-old Bobby would have appreciated his sister's strength the way 40-year-old Bobby does. He'd replied, the last page of their story remained unwritten, full of possibilities that didn't require definition to hold meaning. Bobby continued building furniture that would last generations, now with the financial stability to choose projects based on artistic merit rather than desperation. Alexandra continued wielding corporate power with an ethical foundation that honored both her inherited resources and her authentic values. Timmy continued growing into a boy who understood that families could be complicated and still be filled with love, that sometimes the best people were the ones who'd learned how to find each other again after being lost. And in the workshop space that had become the heart of their reconstructed family, 3 people who'd learned that love was less about perfection and more about persistence, continued the work of creating beautiful things together, not because they had to, but because they chose to, one day at a time, with hands that had learned to trust again, and hearts that had discovered that some kinds of magic were worth waiting 20 years to find.